Hello and welcome to Wellbeing in Action in English. I'm here today talking again with Dani, and the subject we're going to be looking at is the idea of inclusions. Welcome as well for anyone whose English is not their first language. Things to look at today are the modals we're using for suggestions and possibilities. These things like could, perhaps, might, and so on and so forth. Again, it's going to be part of our natural conversation, so have a listen out for them. Anyway, today, like I said, I'm here with Dani, and we're talking about inclusion. Dani, first up, inclusion. What does it mean for you?
Hello, Stevie. Inclusion, as the word says, is making sure that everyone is part of, is included in the process. And that's the best way to put it.
Isn't it? Because we used to talk about differentiation.
Yes.
Which is about making things different for different people. And of course, there was a time where it was actually exclusion.
Yes.
Where people were taken outside of the group and treated totally different.
More recently, there was adapting as well, which is not necessarily bringing the final idea of inclusion, but it's not quite like differentiation.
Yes. So, like I said, we're going to be looking at inclusion, which is going to be looking at all different types of neurodiversities, discussing dyslexia, ADHD, autism, and other things. We are very, very aware, however, that we are reduced in time with such an expansive topic.
Yeah.
So, yes, we know we're going to try, but we won't be doing justice to it all perfectly, but we're going to be considering this in 4 areas of, first of all, what is inclusion and what we mean by it. Then we're going to have a look at the different areas of need, how you recognize this, and the absolute importance of getting a professional diagnosis in this.
Yep.
Then we're going to have a look at the difference between having a neurodivergence and requiring direct intervention in this. Now, in England, this might be that you are on the SEN register, but you don't have an EHCP, which is an educational healthcare plan. And then finally, we're going to be looking at what does this mean for the person who has this neurodivergence in the area of home, education, and the professional life. Now, one thing that we're not going to be talking about is differentiating, use of the correct word there, between children and adults. We'll be using more inclusive terms of people.
Yeah.
Which is very important, because it's very important to know that a person who is neurodivergent was neurodivergent yesterday, is today, and will be tomorrow. So it doesn't matter where they are, they will have the same experience.
Which is a very interesting concept when we talk about inclusion, and adapting led a lot of people in general to believe that it was the neurodivergent responsibility to adapt it to a situation, or very much that I would adapt the place, the school, the work, the home for that neurodivergent.
Absolutely, because I remember one time, for example, when the children were young, and we're going to be letting you know that I myself am diagnosed dyslexic. We have a son who's now 22. He's dyslexic as well. And we have our daughter Julia, 20, and she is 21, and she is diagnosed high functioning autistic. High functioning autistic, just to let you know, is a term that we now use really for Asperger's. But what we want to do is separate Asperger's because of the negative connotation in connection with the word. So like I was saying, when the kids were younger,
Yeah.
I took them to the London Dungeons in London, and anybody who's been there will know this is a very interactive place where they go through crime and the darker history of British culture. Now, one of the things that I didn't know
Yes.
was that there was a lot of surprises and flashing light. Now, you talked about flashing light, and that's great, but there's a lot of surprises and jump scares, which
Yes.
is fine.
Well, it's part of being there.
Part of being there. But we didn't know this when I went, because I had an old memory when it was just a waxworks museum.
And if I remember correctly, the time you're describing, I wasn't there. So you went there by yourself with our two children, quite young at the time. I don't remember if Julia had her diagnosis.
No, definitely not.
Okay.
She didn't get her diagnosis until she was 15.
15, yeah.
Anyway, I was selected for the barber surgeon. And as far as our children were concerned, they just were watching their dad being mutilated and killed in front of them. By the time I picked them up again, they were both terrified. And in the end, I actually had to take them out. And one of the suggestions that I made to them was, could they make it an autism-friendly one show every hour? Just make it autism-friendly, so it was less shocking, let's say. I don't know whether they did it, but this is that thing about making things as inclusive as possible.
Exactly.
Anyway, let's before we actually get on to our chat, Dani, just tell us a little bit about your background, and I'll tell you mine, as in why we feel that we are qualified to speak about this subject.
No, I think that's very important, and it's taken away from all the other kind of specialisms that we have that doesn't necessarily qualify us to speak about that, but other things in life that we've done and achieved. But I have got a QTS, qualified teacher status. I did that in 2006 while living in England. Straight after, I started working in schools and developed a career into teaching and learning specifically. So I did, as most people, get to the leadership
and
head
the
of
important
department.
thing with teaching and learning is it has to be inclusive.
Yes.
Because you're looking at teaching and learning not just for your classroom, but for the whole school.
Yes, because it's part of my job to actually research and then train other teachers in applying this.
And remind us about what you're doing now.
So now I am working as a career developer. I'm qualified.
Yes.
Oh, yes, and my qualification. Sorry. So now I'm finishing a postgraduate in neuroscience with specialism in behavior. So it's behavior neuroscience.
I'm working now more in industry.
Definitely. So bringing that, and this is a very important, and is being a very now subject about neurodivergency and inclusion in a work. So home, work, life, and school.
Good. And as for me, I too have my degree in pedagogy in QTS. Been working in education for 30 years. 14 years of that was in a comprehensive with a specialized unit for children with autism.
Yeah.
Important that when it's not autistic people, it's people first, and people with autism. And it's exactly the same as saying, I'm not a watch person, I am a person with a watch. That's an important thing to look at with our language that we use. And final 2.5 years in England, I was actually the SENCO, so the Special Needs and Disabilities Coordinator in a secondary modern in England as well.
Where we also worked together, which was really interesting because that liaise between the
Teaching and
coordinator
learning.
and the teaching and learning. Yes,
Absolutely.
that was really lovely. Yeah.
But as I say, so we're going to be looking at what inclusion is. We're going to then move on to the different different areas and things to look out for,
Yep.
and the importance of a professional diagnosis on this. We will not be diagnosing, absolutely not. The difference between a neurodivergence, like I said, and someone requiring a specific need and getting an EHCP.
Yes.
And also then we'll be looking at what does this mean in the environment of home, in education, and in your professional life. In education, you see, is also going to be, you could be 40 years old and retraining. You could be 50 and go on a one-day course. You're still receiving education. And so therefore, these principles are going to be very important to bear in mind for everybody. So first of all, let's have a look up of what inclusion is. Well, actually, we have some basic human rights, all of us. We all have basic human rights of education, employment, and fair treatment for our basic needs. Basic needs, food, accommodation, identity. These are all basic rights. So inclusion actually means, how do we make sure that everybody maximizes their fair potential in this?
And that's something that I will just emphasize how important that is to maximize which is very different, that they're doing well. They're doing well enough.
Yes.
And that's the thing that we'll need to focus, is the emphasis on achieving.
This is where we're going to bring into terms of equality and equity. Equality meaning something for everybody, but equity meaning that is fair. And there is a difference between an equality of opportunity and an equity of the outcome. And these are important things to do. I'll give you an example. Many years ago, in the company that my mother was working for, she had to travel, even around the town. And so what they would do is pay for the petrol.
Yeah.
And of course, this is over and above what the petrol cost, because it includes wear and tear and time and so on. And what that meant was that my mother was able, in 1987, to purchase for herself a brand new Renault 5 GTS. Great car. And it was the GTS model, so it wasn't the basic model. It was one with the nice seats, a little radio in it, 1987, probably electric windows, silver grey. She was so proud because she worked out all the finances.
Right.
And this petrol allowance
has allowed her to do that.
Allowed to do it. The company then decided to make things equal and fair, because not everybody had a new car or a car that was reliable. They decided to treat everybody equally and buy everyone a brand new car.
Right.
The car was a Ford Fiesta, popular, basic model, 950 engine, nothing else inside, probably just a heater.
Yeah.
The car was horrible, and they treated everyone with equality. Everybody got a car, whether it was equitable or not, whether you needed it or not, or whether they actually took into account what your situation was or not. The end result was that my mother then had this car that she had to use, because it was only going to be paid on that car, a brand new car that she then had to sell. And you know that when you buy a new car, when you sell it, you're going to lose 30% of the value anyway, which was on finance. And so this idea of equality of outcome actually prejudiced my mum and caused her financial hardship, and she ended up in a worse car. So actually, an equity should have meant that everyone was brought in and discussed, what's your car, what's your need, how do we make this work for you?
It was very early days, and the words were coming in and the meanings were coming around. And
early days, they didn't exist. It was 87.
That's the idea. It was just like when it was first introduced, the idea of equality. and how would that it's interesting, and it was an interesting way of showing
Well,
it,
it is, isn't it?
as an
Because
example.
although there were various things of equality, there was
Yeah.
the Race Act, there was the Sexual Discrimination Act, not even Sexual Equality Act, and the Disability. Everything was pulled together not until 2010,
Yeah.
when we had the Equality Act that covered all of this. But actually looking at these
Laws.
things,
Yes.
actually looking at these things and ideas of equality of opportunity and equity of outcome, let's consider what we both have, which is glasses. And if anyone is paying attention, you'll see that Danny's glasses are on the table. Why are they on the table, Danny, and not on your face?
I only need them when I'm reading.
There you go. And that's equity. So I'm not going to
Yep.
force you to put them on. But equality means equality of opportunity, means that there are opticians on the street.
Yeah.
And in England, the NHS will even give you vouchers to cover your eye test.
Yeah.
So everybody has the equality of opportunity to go and get their eyes tested. Now, you don't have an equality of outcome. So what that means is you don't go in and everybody comes out with the same glasses and the same prescription. You have an equity of outcome, so that you're going to get your prescription for your glasses that you'll need. I've got the prescription for my glasses and my needs. And if you don't need them,
Yeah.
you don't even get the glasses.
It's a good example to easily exemplify what the differences of equality of opportunity and equity on the outcome.
Isn't it?
Would you like to talk a little bit about what inclusion isn't? Just making that clear too.
Absolutely, because there's going to be some certain things where let's just say almost you're not entitled to, which sounds a bit strange and a bit weird, but we need to think about the two words, and they go together, and it's called reasonable adjustment. So you've got to think of these things: an adjustment that gets made which is reasonable, and it's got to be reasonable for both parties. So for example, if someone who has difficult in walking were to go to Dover Castle and then complain that they could not access the top layer of the 12th century keep, an adjustment to put in would not be reasonable, because you would be changing the nature of a historic building. However, if a modern building was being constructed and they didn't put those considerations in place, then it would be considered unreasonable on the building.
I like the choice of word of entitlement and entitled that you've brought, and it's certainly very much linked to your experience in coordinating that and liaising between more than one group or even family, or so adults work. So the HR in companies do a lot of that. They will look into what you are entitled or not. What does the provision in this by the law, what the company can do to accommodate your needs. And that doesn't often, like we've experienced in many situations, feels fair in the same way that the people do not feel they are treated fairly.
One way to look at this thing of fairness. So, for example, let's imagine a person who is blind and wished to be an Air Force pilot. In the armed forces. Well, that's not reasonable. So the armed forces are within their right to disqualify that person from doing that position. They may find something else with inside or totally disqualified. Our own son was disqualified from joining the RAF, for example, because he has flat feet. That's it. You're out. On the other hand, someone who is registered blind may be entitled to have a seeing dog.
Yeah.
Now, for someone who is visually unimpaired to then complain that this person can bring their dog into a situation where they can't, again, well, that's unreasonable for them. You need to have this adjustment and understanding of person needs, because in the end, I'm pretty sure a person who is blind would rather be visually unimpaired and not have a dog.
And this is why conversations such as this one that we are having are very important. We are talking about broader concepts that we would have liked if we were part of a HR in a company and discussing a specific case. And even that, the HR as a whole system would be discussing it as a group and always looking into what the law is suggesting and expecting. And that brings again our first sentence you said, which is about making sure that they're achieving their full potential.
Absolutely.
And that will be the same at work and at home, that we can discuss as well, some inclusion at home.
So like I say, what it's not is when things are unreasonable. I myself I am colourblind, which doesn't come under the Disability Act, although I'm understanding there's some sort of conversations, but it's not quite the same thing. So I'm disqualified in the UK of anything in the medical profession, disqualified from armed forces, emergency services, pilots, anything to do with electronics. Simply because of this. And it's one of those things where sometimes you have to just say, okay, I understand, so these are not open for me, I'm going to go that way. However, let's focus more now on inclusion and understand that when there aren't when there are these reasonable expectations, and one thing that we really must do is emphasize the difference between what might be a neurodivergence or a physical condition and an intellectual one.
Okay.
Because the two are completely separate. One of the things that used to be in the 70s, so there may be people of my generation and older who grow up with a misconception that someone who has a need is a person who may be intellectually challenged as well. And that's certainly not the case. There are studies where able-bodied people sit in a wheelchair and they note how the conversation of people around them change and how they are suddenly excluded, or they're not asked directly, people are asked for them. And all it is an able-bodied person sitting in a wheelchair. And it's not the case. What this is more like, and try to imagine this, we in our culture, whether it's in Brazil or in the UK, we tend to judge people on their ability to answer mathematicals or English language questions on there. Just imagine if we actually ranked everybody on their ability to kick a football.
Very challenging for me.
For me.
But it's qualifying me straight away.
Imagine if we ranked everybody on their ability to play the piano. We'd actually have Elton John at the top.
I found it very interesting when you actually gave the example, because that's something that wherever we are, people would probably kind of understand the ability of speaking a second language. And to be functioning. So if we use the idea of highly functioning, you're highly functioning in a second language if you're fluent. Because otherwise, I'll tell you what, I can't even order a sandwich in Japan, an example. I can do it in some other languages.
And now, like you say, if you have ever been in a situation where you find yourself operating in a foreign country where you cannot communicate or understand, there is nothing that has changed about your intellectual capacity. What has suddenly changed is your ability to communicate, to understand, and to be understood. And this can be hugely frustrating for anyone.
Yeah.
And therefore, when we have an inclusive society, a lot of us now have access to modern technology.
Yes.
Where you can have apps where you speak into the app that you want. The app will change it into the language. You can show the person who can speak back and say to you. That's inclusion, and that's inclusive, and it's not restricting a person anymore, but it's allowing a person to have equity in their result.
I haven't discussed that with you prior to this, but an example I like to give is of everyone having an opportunity to cycle a path or to move along a path, and you were given a bicycle with no support wheels, with one support wheels, or a tricycle. The idea is that we can now move along that path, and some of us will definitely need support, a scaffold, one wheel, two support wheels, and some will need like a tricycle, because not even with the support wheels they will be able to make through. And I find that that is a way to explain that.
And others might even need an electric scooter.
That's it. So, we can make it so many other ways that we can support the different people with their different needs. And one thing that we've noticed, not only
to include the people.
Yes, thank you. And one thing that we've all noticed is that sometimes it's just a very small change that makes
Absolutely.
a massive difference. And the diagnosis is sometimes the beginning of it all, because once they've understood.
Well, a simple thing is, like this, I'm a danger. Like this, I'm fine.
Yeah.
Like this, I can't access the information.
Yes.
Like this, I'm fine. It's a small change.
It is a small change, but that is it's visual for us to know that you have glasses or you don't have glasses. But with a person with autism, sometimes it's just being able to stay a shorter period in a queue, or have a.
Well, let's have a look at these
let's
things.
go. Yeah.
So, first of all, to know is that the laws that you can look up in the UK will be the 2010 Equality Act, 2014 Children's Act, and the 2015 SEN Code and Practice. Now, in Brazil, it's not as advanced as this, though the same kind of ideas are covered.
Yes, we got the 2006 Brazilian Constitution. Oh no, it didn't go into the detail, but we got the 2006 and the 2015, which is an equality act based on very similar ideas, and there's much more that are coming through.
Yes. A lot of the things that Brazil does, Brazil and England, in terms of consulate cooperation and cohesion, work very closely hand in hand. So what we've been finding here in Brazil is that although the application is very different, the actual laws are almost carbon copies, so much so that sometimes we read them side by side and go, they've just stuck it through Google Translate, and good for them.
But if you are from any other, listening from any other nation or country, the best thing would be to always go and base yourself in the law. So go and find out what the law says in your own country and area.
So let's start looking at the different areas of need and the types of things that you could look out for to recognize them. Now, I'm going to emphasize again, these are not prescriptive diagnoses. There are many different ways of looking at what types of breeds of dog there are, and then to say you got a German Shepherd and that is the definitive of what a dog is, wouldn't really work. So we need to also bear all of this in mind as well.
Yes.
So it's not a one. There are trends, things that could be. The things are quite similar in everyone, but how they work out
Yes.
can be very, very different. The other thing to note is the danger of self-diagnosis.
Yes, I think that is something that we really must bear in mind, and don't do it for yourselves or others where you're thinking, oh my gosh, I have that as well. I have that as well. Oh, certainly I've seen that my son, my daughter, my friend, my boss, or whoever it is, have that as well. So be very careful not to self-diagnose it, to
The
conduct
internet these days is very, very useful. There's a lot of information out there, but there is a danger as well of, let's say, if you have a headache and you went to a certain web page, you may walk away thinking that you have a brain tumor.
Yeah.
Where actually all it is, you've been listening to music too loud.
Yeah.
So we're going to be very cautious with this. We're also going to be very generic.
Yeah.
These are the types of things that you can look for. Other things as well, like we said before, nothing to do with your intelligence.
No.
It can impact in some cases, but it doesn't. People with these needs, this could be your doctor, your lawyer, yourself, your therapist, your family, your colleagues. It could be anyone. And just to say, one of the most frustrating thing is of someone like myself, like our daughter Julia, who is diagnosed neurodivergent, is when they say, well, you can't be because you know how to read and write. Or to Julia, you can't be because you can interact with people.
Yeah. Or actually a little bit of, oh, I must have that as well, because I feel like this at times.
Yes, and that's an important word that you said, Dani, at times. There are things that you might feel at times, but when you have it, you feel it all the time.
And you actually know no difference. And this is why sometimes you only recognize in yourself that there must be something different if you are actually searching on the internet or talking to people that have received a diagnosis, because it's only then that you think, oh, so this is different for me than it is to you. And that's the time which we will encourage you to go and speak with someone and a professional out there about it.
Professional.
Yes.
So the four main areas it's going to be communication and interaction, and this will cover people with autism and speech and language needs. Cognition and learning, which covers people with dyslexia or number blindness, which is also dyscalculia, dyspraxia, those types of things. Then we can look at physical and sensory and complex medical needs, which are a little bit easier because they're a bit more obvious to the outside person. And this will include visual impairments and auditory impairments and deafness. And finally, the fourth one is social, emotional, and mental health. And this includes people with ADHD as well.
ADD.
So first of all, the things with communication and interactions. Some of the things that we can look at and notice in people are when people are quiet, reluctant to speak in a large group, particularly. They may have problems with social interactions and social cues. One of the ones to think about would be if you ever watched The Big Bang Theory and you got Sheldon Cooper. And when the other characters are speaking, he asks them, is that sarcasm? And because he doesn't know. Someone who makes a joke, don't know. And social cues, whether people are being serious or not, I don't know. Just tell me, straight, because a lot of the times the information that they're receiving, they will receive it as if it is virtual.
Yeah.
So if you said to someone with autism, get your skates on,
They would literally be looking for their
they would be
skates.
looking for their skates.
Yeah.
They could be.
Yeah.
They could be. I know our daughter Julia has this issue as well.
Very, very literal. She will find it very hard if we use. I can't think of an example right now, but there is a need to be very literal with her. In fact, I think I then just do them most of the time.
One of the things that happens with Julia is that if you or anyone else would say, I will meet you at 9:30.
Oh, yes.
You will meet them at 9:30. If you're there at 9 o'clock, she won't be ready.
Well, that's a very good one.
If you're there at 10, she'll go into panic.
That's a very good one because it's social cue. That's been something that she's still having difficulty after 3 years living in Brazil, because there is that need, if we are very clear and punctual, so sure about it, I'll be here at 9:30. She will definitely be there at 9:30 and not 35.
Yes.
Or 32.
Another thing is very important, especially when we're thinking about a workplace environment.
Yes.
Especially large ones where there's group works and group interactions, is they may find that actually this group work is overwhelming.
Yeah.
Now, overwhelming can be, imagine that you have Christmas dinner on the go. You have people who are demanding their presence, people who are wanting something to eat. You got paper everywhere, people coming in and out the house with muddy boots. You're trying to cook 30 different types of vegetables.
Yes.
And you just lose it because it's too much. And then for these guys, that's what can happen.
Yeah. And when we look at some people going through it sometimes, or when people go through that all the time, and this is where it's very easy at times in a working environment or at home just to be dismissive of some of these points that we're bringing, because you think, oh, it's only today, they're just distressed today. I know it feels like it's a stress. It's not a sign of anxiety as well, not when there is a diagnosis associated
well,
to
you mean
it.
it is a sign of anxiety, because yes, it is. You got to remember as well that these people, with a person with this diagnosis, will behave differently in different situations. So, for example, in a more social environment, they could mask.
Yeah.
Then when they get to a home environment,
Yes.
they could be working all day where they've got the mask on.
Yeah.
When they get home, the mask comes off.
Yes.
So does everything. And either a meltdown or a shutdown happens. So the question is, why are you behaving here and over here you're not?
Yeah.
Well, it's all part of this.
Yes, it is.
So yes, things about anxiety as well is anxiety of change, sudden change. When things aren't actually scheduled or put in place. And one of the with our own daughter, for example, I had to learn this because I would wake up in the morning and say, "Come on, put your coat on, we're going out."
Yeah. In a work environment, is that if you've had a place where you've always parked and there's one day that you arrive and someone now parked in that place, so it's changed or passed away, or an area of work where you follow the routine and it became a ritual to you to have that happening every day, and one day is a surprise or there's a change. Yes. And it's a sudden change. So a sudden change can throw someone
off course. Our cousin Kevin has been talking about this recently.
Yeah.
And it got me thinking, the shift in the working environment and location from a fixed office pre-pandemic to a more flexible office post-pandemic. And somebody with a neural divergence, just this change could be actually overwhelming and quite scary, especially if there's no certainty of who will be in when, where am I supposed to be, what is now going to be expected of me, when can I meet these people. And although we're going to be talking about a very small percentage of a population, latest figures, by the way, is that in a school society, around 13%. So 13% means that in a classroom of 30, you've got 3. And this could be anyone with anything. So, but thinking of a working,
it can be higher.
You've got 200. You're going to now look at 2025.
Not long ago, I've listened to a podcast. It could have been one that we've been listening about, Kev. That was 1 in 7 in some working environment, and that's a higher percentage if we consider the number of people that are affected at work. And this is actually good because we are working for inclusion, and we're working for the idea of bringing the neurodivergent working, and we all working together in that environment. One other thing, just to finish the point that you mentioned about people before or during the pandemic, and now is actually changing again, because we had 2-3 years post-pandemic where people got used to working in a certain way, and now some offices are asking them to return. And that is again another change. And because people are being asked but not necessarily forced to come back, and if there is a expectation that they are back, there has to be a better accommodation.
And this is about social cues, because if a line manager is suggesting that perhaps it could be a nice idea that we, without wishing to force, the interpretation of someone with a neural divergence could be, they don't have to be in.
That is a could be, and is a suggestion. So the best thing is to have, as you've always said, speak to the person.
The other thing to bring in here is fear.
It's communication and interaction.
Fear. And what do I mean by fear?
I
mean that a person with autism and a person, when we now move into the cognition and learning with dyslexia, are afraid. Now, they're afraid. Why? Because of this, they know in themselves that they are never sure that they've understood everything. They've understood something, but they are in fear that they've misunderstood it. Simple example. Julia's 5th birthday, we drove to Disney in Paris. I booked the hotel and I booked the ferries. And what I had forgotten is that processing, because I'd gone through everything, and I'd forgotten that 12:30
midnight
was the next day. So I'd actually booked the ferry for the day before, and I'd missed it. Now, these are the types of things where someone might say, oh yeah, we all do those sort of things. But when you do it all the time, that you've misunderstood the question, you've interpreted, your actual cognition and learning process has gone through, and you've got it wrong, and you've done it again, that you live in a constant fear that you've got it.
So if we
wrong.
Consider inclusion, let's just remember that it can be on written and spoken language. So let's take the fact that being sometimes passively expecting people to read and understand an email is a massive assumption. and the fact that if I send you an email, I don't need to check or to give an opportunity to talk about if you understood or not. So that's just a very simple one.
I did it last week.
Yeah.
I cancelled the wrong pizza.
Oh, yes.
So I cancelled James's pizza instead of yours. So when they came, you couldn't eat.
Yeah. So you cancelled mine instead of James's, and that's what happened.
And I'd got it wrong. Yeah. So moving on now to things that I will get wrong, which is in the cognition and learning.
Yeah.
Things to think about this is, one thing that I misunderstood about myself growing up is that dyslexia is about getting your B's and D's mixed up. No, it isn't. There's so much more to it. The best way of putting it is, I got issues with processing, and I got issues with short-term memory. So you might notice we've got sheets of paper here, because without this, I don't know where I am. Yeah. In the morning, this is how bad it is. In the morning, I do my workout, and I count the repetitions.
Yeah.
Problem is, if I'm thinking about something else at the same time, I even forget what number I've got to. Yeah. I will count 1, 2, 3. How many? I don't know.
And again, I know that a lot of people listening to that will say, "Oh, but I do that as well." And that is just an example, and it doesn't have sometimes happen all the time. The working memory, and especially with dyslexic, is associated with the frontal cortex, the actual, and actually some of the connections. This is why it can affect in the brain other areas, not just language is one of them, and communication and writing. But it links with so many, and there is no capacity to keep it there. So your short-term memory is very weak as well.
My actual results is that I'm in the 0.001% of a population with very high IQ and almost non-existent working memory and processing.
Yeah. Very hard to remember what we've discussed just a minute ago. And it's things such as, but I've only just asked you to do that. I can't remember. And let's think about it at home and at work, how devastating that would be for the person that said, I know, and like you said, you live in fear because you've asked me to do something. I don't remember what it is. And if I ask you again, you're going to shout at me.
Yes.
And
I've already told you, and I was very clear the first time.
Yes, and I'm not going to repeat it, and you're in trouble now.
And the other thing is,
not at home.
when the list of commands is so long.
Yes.
I'm remembering the Monty Python film, The Meaning of Life, and there's a school scene where the schoolmaster goes through where they're meant to put their coat and the thing, and I am utter amazement of my friend Michael, because we can go and see a movie together, laugh all the way through. He'll walk out the movie quoting it.
Yeah.
I will say, I don't remember. I know it was a good film, but I don't know what happened. When I'm watching it again for the second time, I'll remember
long-term memory. It's why I find it amazing your uses of analogy, and you continuously do these things, and is for dyslexic, it's kind of a trick, and is a way to help you to sustain a learning for a longer period of time that a non-dyslexic would need.
And in terms of analogy, what you need, it's like this. Imagine you've got a computer with an enormous RAM memory.
Yeah.
And that's the area in which you're going to be working, because it's very, very big. Then you've got an enormous hard drive. So you've got a store of knowledge. And you've got a tiny, tiny processor.
Yes.
So what that means is that the stuff in the working memory, to get it into the long-term memory, has a small processor and a very small chance of that information being transferred successfully. And at the same time, when you're in a meeting, you've heard something, you've said that you've got this information, that you read it, but being able to pick it up and remember what it was. So one of the things that you may find that in a large meeting is that this person is quiet.
Yeah. So that comes as insecurity. The low esteem is very interesting because
Self-esteem.
the low self-esteem is very interesting because we have, and by we, I'm talking about educators, or when I look at the way that we look in neuroscience, says that we notice that the self-esteem is lowered as at the beginning the child, and then the teenager, and later on the adult had not understood their own needs compared to others. So you automatically ended up comparing yourself to others, not knowing of your needs, and think, but I can't do that. I know what they're saying, but I can't do it this
Well,
way.
others are also comparing them to you,
A lot,
because
definitely, yes.
in a competitive world with competitive ideas,
And you will hear that your cousins, your brother, your sister, or
Your
this is in a
colleagues.
home environment, and then by the time you get to work, it is your colleagues. So that's something that we notice.
Now, the last thing I really want to pick up on this one here is organization skills.
Brilliant.
And the organization skills are important in a home environment where this person potentially can live in a very disorganized room. However, that person will know where everything is. So somebody else who comes in and moves stuff, that this person is lost. Organization skills, meaning that our son, he does it. He will walk out, put something down, walk back into a room, not know what is done with it. I do that, but I have learned to do routines to put the key in the right place. If it's gone, I don't know where it is. But in a work environment, when we're talking about organization skills, specifically with deadlines, one of the things that a person with cognition and learning will do is procrastinate. And they will procrastinate because it's very hard to organize everything that they need to do into the correct stage. And it will then get to a head. So in a working environment, especially a flexible one, where people are more generous and say stuff they think is helping, it doesn't. I'll give you an example. Get back to me when you can.
No. So one of the ways, actually, from life experience of living with neurodivergence and me, that's the way I used to look. It's actually first work in a schedule that is by the day, by the hour, depending when the deadline is. So if I know that James or Steve will have to have something ready by the end of the day, we work a schedule. We say by lunchtime, by mid-afternoon, by midday, like we did today, like we always do, we're going to do this. Or you actually, to help with the organization, you get them to organize a system with you, or you organize it with them, which is to actually have things around the house or the work that will allow them to then, when they get lost, go back and find where the papers are, where the pens are, simple things like that.
Well, moving on, the next area is going to be physical. And actually, you know what? I'm not going to really say anything about this. The reason is that these ones tend to be more visually obvious to the person on the outside, and they will come with their own sets of diagnosis with them. So the advice there: read it, learn it, adapt it into, and make sure stuff are inclusive on that.
Okay.
The final one actually then is to look at is the social, emotional, mental health issues, including ADHD.
Yeah.
Now, why is ADHD there and not in cognition and learning? It's basically a more compulsive behavior of not being able to control these emotional outbursts on that. And therefore, they will be much more immediate, sudden, rather than processed and controlled. But there are people who have gone through trauma of various kinds, which I'm not even going to look at here, that's actually affected the way that a person is able to process their own emotions. So things that you're looking at is someone who, instead of is able to listen and think and come up with a response, will actually either fight or flight.
Yeah.
Get immediately over aggressive or immediately run away. And all you've done is ask them a very simple question, a seemingly simple question. But they might react in this way. Another way of reacting is called freezing or folding.
Yeah.
So freezing would be you've asked them something and they just look at you. They don't know. Folding could actually mean collapsing in on themselves. It's all, and you go, but I've just asked you a simple question. So it's a inappropriate emotional response to an everyday situation. And another little clue could be stomach aches.
Yep.
What can happen is the emotional process goes wrong, which then goes into the vagus nerve that hits into the stomach, that then causes the butterflies or the upsets or something, and it's just a stomach ache. Or it's a way of getting out of the situation by claiming a stomach ache. And anyone who is a home project manager or a education project manager, or actually the company vision project manager in the team, or what, if you start noticing that someone is constantly getting unwell, could be a little clue.
That's it. And this is just something so important that you've pointed out. The behavior is usually just a way to manifest something else. And this you would really notice with whatever person you're dealing with. Or it could be a child that has sudden, or it appears to be, everything was going well and then it changed. So it could be a sudden change to the behavior, and that happens repeatedly many times, and you can't make it up exactly what it is. Could be a colleague at work where you think, oh, I thought everything was going well, I just asked this question and they reacted this way. Or it could be someone in the classroom that actually behaves in response to someone else's behavior, but you're not quite sure, and it happens over suddenly.
The last thing I want to say in conclusion to all of this is remembering people mask.
Yes.
People don't want their true selves to show.
Yes.
So what can happen is it's almost like shaking up a bottle of soda. And sometimes they can hold on, and then they will go to another environment
and then they
explode. What you might notice is that sometimes, boom, it happens. And here's another bit about the fear. You then get labeled as a troublemaker, an irresponsible person, an unreliable person.
Yeah. And Steve, I think it's important just to bring it out now that these are not excuses, which is important to know that the diagnosis will help with the self-awareness, and it's not as an excuse or, oh, yeah, well, I can do it this way because, but I know this happens. Now I know why.
This is the importance of a professional
Very good
psychologist diagnosis, because what that will do is actually define the need.
Good. So this is where we look. Why would you look at us a professional to give you a diagnosis? Define the need. What else? Do you want me to go?
Yeah,
I
I
was
thought you were reading
no,
it now.
I was just emphasizing the need to do that. Define the extent of the need, define the impact of the need, and define action plan and give recommendations of intervention required.
This is so important because somebody who has a pain in the leg, it could be because they pulled a muscle. It could be because they walked into a table. It could be bone splints. It could be. And you cannot have therapy or intervention or the correct one without, and in fact, without the correct diagnosis, you could actually be causing further trauma to this. Right, so let's have a look and see some more sorts of things that we can do.
Yes.
Well, I don't know whether the camera will pick this up, but this is something that you can find on the internet, which is principles of instructions from a fella called Rosenshine. Dani, explain to us what this is all about.
Okay, so Rosenshine actually in 1989, if I'm not wrong, started up research looking into outstanding results in classrooms. And what he ended up noticing is that teachers that were getting the best results from their students, which we would consider the outstanding results, these were along the years. And then in 92, he actually brought in the paper. He picked up originally 12 principles, then some specialists and Rosenshine himself put it into 10 principles, and then we look into some core. But what they do, they actually help in the way that you instruct learning, and understanding that learning is to do with any information that you're trying to retain or to apply. So we look into, do you want me to go through all 10? Yeah. So in a very summarized way, daily review, which is to actually being able to repeat learning. New material in small steps. So it's actually breaking things down, chunking them before you offer the whole material. Ask questions, very important that you know what is being understood of what you have said. Provide models, another fantastic tool that now in the 2000s, we know through neuroscience that it's because we can actually learn better from seeing it happening. Guide student practice, which is work within the student model. Check student understanding. Different than asking questions is to actually check how much of what you said is being retained. Obtain high success rate, and this is actually the way that you are going to repeat, chunk, and bring the success rate before you move along with the next stage of the learning. Scaffolding is one of my favorites. You scaffold for difficult tasks, and this is also for highly talented students and gifted. Independent practice, always provide an opportunity for the students to go through, and our learners in that case go through, and weekly and monthly review.
This is great because in the education, we have an education project manager in there who's looking after everything.
Yeah.
These principles work. We've seen it, we've tried it, we've done it.
Yeah.
In terms of the classroom, this is called quality first teaching. However, in a the company vision manager, wherever you are in there, a line manager, a group manager, a thing, you can actually apply these into a quality provision for your team. So when, for example, you give a task, break it down, model it, show the example of what you're talking about. There's some other things as well that can be used. An example usually is, you and I have both been to many training event where a person has gone through 250 ideas. Then you go immediately into a working party to discuss these ideas. Well, where's the thinking time? Where's the processing time? How about if you present some ideas with some open questions, and then give the people there half an hour of unstructured time where all they can do is just chat about these things. And let's say someone with a neurodivergence, if they want to walk out and go for a walk around the park and just think about these things, great, because these principles can work. And also in a home environment, an example, when the home project manager there is asking somebody to do a task, such as tidy your room.
You have to break down those tasks because our room is massive. So we can look into today, this minute, this 25 minutes, this half an hour, which is what I do with the chunking. 25 minutes to tidy the area of your wardrobe, 25 minutes to check the area around your desk. Very important to bring, Steve, that I am transferring skills from the over 15 years I've worked in educational system and transferring that into an office and an industry and working environment, purely because in the last few years, more and more people have realized that they were not performing to their best.
Yeah. And this is where we need to get back to this idea of inclusion, because here's the thing. Like I said before, the statistics are 13% on Centerport. Those guys on an EHCP who need those direct intervention, that legal intervention that lasts until they're 25, is 4.3.
Yep.
That means together you got 17.3 of your workforce with, and the rest, the larger, without. However, these sorts of principles work for everyone, and that's what makes it inclusive. The reason is, if I break down a task into small steps, everybody can access this.
Definitely. I'm using project management in nutrition because that's to help people to actually manage those big tasks of changing a diet, living a healthier life in small steps. So we start with one change, do it daily, reveal it before we're bringing the next one, scaffold when it's necessary, which will offer them the support of a plate or of a material. It's amazing. It does work.
And it actually works with everybody.
With everybody.
So therefore, when you're doing these types of principle well, they are so inclusive
that
you actually don't need to change.
No.
You don't need to do anything different. You don't need to differentiate because it includes
know what is
everyone.
really lovely? I've heard it just recently of someone that I invited to come home on a party, on a meal, and this person said afterwards, I will come to your house. I've got lots of different new needs, and that was including religious and food intolerance. But if there is an inclusive house, it's yours. And I felt that was just such a good comment to get from someone that felt comfortable in the sense. But
that's it.
You are right. Apply to everything.
So the last thing that I wanted to bring up is a book that I read once called The Houdini Solution.
Yes.
The importance of thinking inside the box to aid creativity. And I like this idea. The reason is that when you have flexibility, unclear boundaries, unclear instructions, non-specific terminology in your language, it can lead people, especially those with neurodivergence, to go off on a tangent.
Yes.
And then they lose their confidence because they're never sure, or they thought they were doing something well, and actually the end result is dismissed because it wasn't what the other person said.
Yes.
However, when you actually define that box, I'm defining the place, I'm defining the time, I'm defining what is expected, I'm defining everything, but then I'm leaving it up to you. You'll get a result. I'll use this as the James Bond analogy. In James Bond, you got M, who defines the mission.
Yep.
That's the mission, Bond. That's what I need you to do. And that mission is shared with ministers. It's shared with the Q branch. It's shared with James Bond. That's the box of the mission. Then Q takes the mission, looks at it, and works out the specialist things that Bond is going to need in order to achieve the mission.
Yep.
So it's that connection between them. It's these principles. It's looking at the
tailored
mission
for your needs.
Exactly. And then the rest of the film is Bond going out there and doing it his way, as long as he's achieving the mission, which he does with the support of Q branch. And that is total inclusion on that. So the final thing, thanks, Danny. That was a big conversation. We've gone over our time. The final thing to do is this. Look, it's very important for us, all of us, as we said before, to know ourselves.
Yes.
And someone with a neurodiversion, even more important.
Yes.
Because we can't guess. But then the most important thing is to listen to the person. And what you do is you adapt yourself to that person's needs. And don't just suppose that when somebody says, I have this, I'm like this, and then you say, oh, that's fine because I read a book about it last week. Oh, that's fine because my uncle is like this as well. No. Speak to the person, find out what they need, and most importantly, read their documentation, whether it's an EHCP, psychological report, or any other doctor or medical issue. They may not have one because these can be expensive, but then sit down and ask them in these types of things and situations how they work best.
Please,
and how they can feel included.
Speak to the person, not speak for the person. And that in a specific case, and yet when you have a child that is still not feel that you speak. But this case, I want to speak about a young person, because it's often that the parent will want to speak for them and not allow that to happen. So good luck, everyone is feeling a little bit lost, and maybe after this we'll find the encouragements to go and look for help or someone to talk to, just to clarify. And if you're a professional in need of any support and help,
speak to your HR.
Yes, there's always someone there that is willing to help.
Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Steve.
And any questions, leave it in the comments, like and describe. And obrigado.
Canal de Piracicaba.
Ciao, ciao. Goodbye.